Welcome to Through the Drama. Kris, Harrison and Lauren Zima coming to you from the home office in Austin, Texas. Today, LZ, we're going to talk about something that is very important to you and to us in our lives.
Yes, grief. Well, actually, you know what? As we were sitting here thinking, or as I was sitting here thinking, I was looking at you, listening to you say that, and really being grateful for how important it has become to you. If people don't know, basically, I lost my dad when I was 22. So it's 15 years ago this year. And so grief has been a part of my story for a while. It's not something you ask for, but it is something we will all go through. But what's interesting is, I don't know if people know, you're older than me. And we're married, but you have both your parents still.
Right.
So this is something that I've experienced much younger than you. And going back, do you remember like what it was like for you when I first started talking about losing my dad and how you felt about understanding it?
Very much. When, and I know that you and I have talked about this, and this is something we can discuss today about there's that awkward moment of when do you bring that up in a relationship? Is that date one where it's like, okay, here we go, talking about dead dad, or is it date two? Is it date three? And so, I think we did it well. Again, I think you and I have great balance in our relationship and how we talk because we're both interviewers at heart. And so I think when we got into talking about your family, because family means so much to both of us, and then we dove into your dad's story and what that meant to your family and your younger siblings, et cetera, it didn't seem to define you, but it also has defined you, if that makes sense. And I think long story short, and this is odd to say, I'm really grateful for how much grief you've brought to my life.
Do you feel that way?
No, I really do. And I mean that in an educational perspective because I do, I lost all my grandparents are gone. I don't have any more living grandparents, but they died at the ripe old age. They lived their life. It was the natural order of things, as we like to say. My parents are alive. My brother, my sibling, they're alive. And so, I've gone through natural grief, but I haven't gone through the unnatural grief, I guess you could say. And so you have definitely educated me on that. And I'm very grateful for that. I truly am, because I think it's made me more compassionate, more thoughtful, and also more open to talk about it.
Very much. The difference between there was a moment not long ago when we were talking in our bedroom about it. And the way that you listened to me in that conversation, I remember checking in my mind oh, this is really different than the way it was a few years ago. And so I'm very involved. It's also interesting how we've pointed out it defines you, but it doesn't. I always say it's you don't ask for this, but it's just a reality, and life's going to throw things at you that will define you as a person. I didn't ask for grief to be such a part of my story, but I think all you can do is take an experience and try to make it a positive effect on yourself in some way. And an organization that's really helped me do that and has been a big part of why grief is so big in our life is this nonprofit called Experience Camps. So I found Experience Camps a few years ago. I volunteer with them and I am now on the board. And when I joined the board, the director of the board, Danny, advised me, it really helps as a board member if your spouse is going to be really involved. And he said, and I already know Kris is, so thank you.
I'm all in.
But Experience Camps is really the premier organization on grief in the U.S. What they do is they put on healing summer camps for kids and for adults and for families, if kids and parents or caregivers want to go together. And they have this really interesting model because I think when you hear a summer camp about grief, people have questions at first, but it's about playing through grief is their motto, joy and healing and counseling, but also finding joy and being positive mentally and moving forward.
Well, my first thought when I heard Experience Camps, I thought the same thing because I was not educated in what it was. And I thought, oh, that's kind of sad and just feels very therapeutic.
When you say a camp about death and grief, it can sound very dark. Yeah.
And then once the door was open and we realized what it is the most magnificent, joyous, and I know that sounds weird too, but it is the most joyous, beautiful thing you'll ever hear about.
Well, we wanted to bring in the person to discuss both grief as a whole in our culture. How do we handle it in America and what can we do about it? The person who founded Experience Camps is the best person I know to talk to about this. Please welcome to Through the Drama, and she knows about going through the biggest dramas in all of our lives, Sara Deren. She is the founder and CEO of Experience Camps. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hi. I'm just beaming listening to the two of you talk about grief. Like it is filling my heart with all of the good things.
Again, a weird thing to say, but I think that's, maybe we'll start there, Sarah, is that's kind of the misnomer about grief. It is something that we can joyously talk about, and you can just talk about it normally. It doesn't have to be such a heavy topic all the time.
Absolutely. That is why we exist at experience camps and why we're talking about this. It is, as Lauren pointed out, it is the thing that everyone's going to go through at some point. Death is a certainty in our lives. Everybody is going to go through grief at some point. We focus primarily on children where, Kris, to your point, it's sort of that unnatural time. It's usually the grief that children are experiencing. It's not supposed to be that way. It's usually somebody who has died young or unexpectedly, or as you said, before their time. And that makes it so awkward for people to talk about. It creates fear for so many people, and they lean away from it. And when you lean away from grief, when you don't talk about it, it creates isolation. And when you have isolation, whether you're a child or an adult, bad things happen, right? There can be negative outcomes from isolation. I think we all know and understand that. But by just integrating it into our lives, making it part of the conversation as you're doing right now, there can be such incredible connection, as you talked about. There can be incredible resilience that grows from that. But all of the good stuff in life and relationships comes from that connection that can be even more profoundly deep as a result of grief, as a result of something like this happening, especially before it's meant to, that affords that depth in a relationship and a conversation.
Well, today we're going to take the awkwardness out of the conversation and we are going to dive into all things grief. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
We are back with Sara Deren, CEO of the nonprofit Experience Camps, which puts on healing summer camps for kids who have lost a parent or a sibling and are going through grief. Sara, I want to kind of talk about what it is we're doing wrong with grief on a bigger scale in America. I mean, first of all, what do you wish that people knew about grief that they don't know? If someone hasn't been through grief, and, I think grief can be, as we said, natural. It can be shocking. There's similarities and differences between all types of grief. But overall, what do you wish people knew about grief that they might not?
I think, grief on its own is just the normal reaction to loss, right? It's not big and scary. It's a thing that is, as I said before, going to happen to everybody. I think where grief goes wrong is when we don't talk about it, when we isolate people in their experience by making them feel alone in it. But I think there can also be such tremendous connection when you do talk about it. So making that jump from making it this thing that's this big, scary topic that nobody wants to broach, and then turning that into something that can be even more meaningful in a person's life because of its existence. What I want people to know is that jump is just opening up that door, opening up the conversation.
But Sara, I've seen you do this on an expert level. We've been at events, we've held fundraisers for experience camps at our house. And you, because this is your life's work in many ways, you talk about grief all the time. And so how do you do it? Because I think if somebody hasn't experienced grief, say they have a friend who they want to support, I have people come to me all the time. Hey, I know somebody who just lost someone. What do I do? What do I say? What do I do? How do you talk about grief and normalize it the way that
Because we're all also worried about saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
I do talk about it all the time. You can ask any of my friends. I'm that girl at the cocktail party that's like, hey, my dad died. What about you? I'm always looking to open that door. And it's just that, right? It is just opening the door and being okay with the discomfort. Right? There might be somebody who doesn't react or respond in the way that you would hope they would by opening up. But 9 times out of 10, that person's going to be like, oh my God, I've been waiting for somebody to ask. Let me tell you my life story. Let me tell you my experience with this. And so few people do ask that when you are that person to open that door, people are charging through it, looking for that opportunity. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, like, what do you do when you're first dating and how does that come up? It's so in most parts of, especially our adult life and even our childhoods, there aren't a lot of opportunities to say, this thing happened to me, especially if it didn't happen recently, right? When somebody dies within that year, everybody generally knows there's rituals, there's funerals, there's things that are happening. But if that loss happened years ago, there aren't a lot of opportunities to bring it up. in a way that feels natural. So being the person who can ask some questions and not assume that a timeline is closed, right? If the loss happened a year ago, then I guess we're done talking about it. That's not true, right? So always being curious about a person's story, their grief, giving an opportunity to tell you their name. What was the name of the person who died? How are you feeling coming up to this Father's Day or Mother's Day? Asking really simple questions that gives that person permission to answer in the way that they're feeling in that moment.
Yeah, look, I'm going to brag on LZ a little bit here too. And she brings us up the week or two after somebody dies, it's casserole, galore and everybody's there. Lauren's really good about you mark down the day. And so you remember, oh my, Susan lost her dad or lost her mom on this day. And so you reach back out on that anniversary and you put it in your calendar. And so you remind people. And you also brought up a good point of if somebody says they've lost somebody, don't just be like, I'm sorry. It's like, what was his name? One of the things you taught me, people want to tell their person's story. That's a fond memory. Tell me a great thing about your dad. Tell me a great thing about your sister.
Well, if you don't let them talk about them, then the only thing that begins to define them is their death, right? And I remember telling you when we were dating, like, I want to talk about my dad. If my dad were alive, I would still be like telling you funny stories about him. But I think people are hesitant because they don't want to hurt you. Like Kris said, they don't want to ask in case it's painful. And we are all afraid of saying the wrong thing. One thing I'll say if somebody loses someone recently is like, hey, you're on my heart. I don't know exactly. And I think it's okay to say, I don't know the right thing to say. But that speaks to us culturally. Sara, I don't know if with experience camps, you've looked around the world at how different cultures handle grief, but America certainly seems to have an issue with it. Like, I always think about how we get sex education in school. We learn where babies come from, even though not everybody will have kids, yet we don't teach our kids in school about death and about loss. It's like very absent from the conversation.
It is. It's that, again, that fear, that discomfort that loss naturally brings up until we are able to lean into it. I think school is where we have the biggest opportunity to do better. A lot of kids will tell us, especially at school, they feel incredibly isolated. Not only do their peers not understand them or want to talk about it, but their teachers don't either. They're not equipped and they're busy, right? They don't necessarily have the ability to individualize each conversation with a kid, especially when they're going through something hard. But it doesn't take a lot to go from negative to positive, right? It can be just, like you said, saying those words, tell me a story about your dad. How are you doing today? Even if that person doesn't want to respond in that moment, they know that you're willing to sit there with them in that grief and be present with them. And that can be the difference between loneliness and not loneliness, just in those simple terms and those simple gestures that anybody can make. So yeah, I think culturally, America's not great at it. We do lean away from hard topics like that, where they're uncomfortable. There are definitely other countries and cultures that do it better. And I think what I notice about those is they tend to be those cultures are rooted in community, really strong sense of community. And even in America, in any country, where there are those communities, we tend to do it better, right? Religion has really great rituals around grief and death and dying. Other communities in different, Africa has a lot of ritual as a culture around death and dying because it's really strong in their community. So I think that can be replicated anywhere as long as we're really leaning into that sense of community and the connection through those experiences that we can all have.
I think that's exactly what you've created with experience camps is this community. And can you talk about, well, I know like statistically in America, for example, the stats show that about 3 months after someone dies, people kind of stop checking in. That support's there. Like you said, babe, people bring the food and they check on you, but about 3 months is how long it goes. And that's nothing. I mean, when I look back at losing my dad, I think for the first 5 years, I was in deep grief more than I even realized at the time. But creating that community, can you talk about the difference or the importance that you've seen in your grief work on getting counseling and therapy versus being around people who relate to you and understand you? Because we are a very like therapy focused culture. Mm-hmm. I met someone the other day who told me she'd lost her dad and I kind of wanted to talk to her about it. And she said, well, no, I'm seeing a psychiatrist. And I was like, okay, but like, have you like, do you want to talk to me about it? Because we've had the same experience. So what do you think are the pros and cons of each method of healing there?
Gosh, I love that question. Look, I think everybody grieves differently. Every individual needs different things. And there's absolutely a time and place and a really important space for therapy when people are stuck, when they're not moving through their grief in a way that kind of integrates it into their lives or in anything, right? Whether it's grief or something else. I think therapy can be really helpful and healing in getting people beyond a point that they're stuck in. But as I said before, grief is a natural reaction to loss. It's not a disorder. It's not a mental health, issue. It's something that is meant to be adjustable in your life, something that you can adjust to. So in most cases, I believe that peer support can be the healing modality. That can be the thing that gets you through the really hard moments because it allows you to adapt it into your life, into your day-to-day, in a way that normalizes it. And there's nothing that normalizes something more than knowing other people who have gone through that and survived it, and where you can see that model of what that can look like when you get past this point. So I'm a really strong believer in the peer support model, which is what we do at camp. And I think what we do, like we'd said, in community, right? It's allowing people to connect in shared experiences. And then, yes, absolutely. If you're stuck and you can't get past a certain point and you're struggling and you're having hard feelings beyond the normal hard feelings, therapy, psychology, absolutely, there's a place for that.
Sara, we're not done yet. When we come back, I want to talk more about experience camps. It's something that has changed your life. You're on the board. You created this thing. What exactly is it? We're going to find out when we come back.
Back with Sara Deren, CEO and founder of Experience Camps, which puts on 1 week long healing summer camps for grieving kids who have lost a parent or a sibling. So Sara, you do so much great work in the grief space. Why does that model work? What's the value of that 1 week model? Because I think some people wonder, what about the rest of the year? But that 1 week for these kids is so powerful.
It is. It's the return to childhood, right? So you have to imagine, Kris, you alluded to this earlier, you hear about grief camp, and I'd say 99% of the kids that come are like, grief camp, that sounds sad. No, thank you. And then they arrive at camp and it is one big fun dance party and sports and, competitions and all the things that you'd find at summer camp. It allows kids to return to what are the basic elements of their youth development, their childhood, play, right? So we start with play and then we weave in the clinical support, the coping, the expressive language, all of those kind of fancy clinical terms that allow them to talk about their grief. We give them the space to talk about their grief. And what happens in the combination of those two things, the play and the grief, is that they can be themselves. They can show up in whatever way they are, in whatever moment they're in with their grief. They can lean entirely into the joy and play, or they can spend a lot of their time feeling their feelings, whatever it is, or they can move between those two things. That's what's so powerful about camp, is that it allows kids to be exactly who they are in whatever moment they're in with their grief.
And a lot of the volunteer counselors, I think most of them have actually also lost someone. So it is this communal model. And I've seen these kids, they call it the best week ever. And they get like this surge of healing and joy in lives that are otherwise kind of difficult. And it really helps them last throughout the year. I'm asking Sara a lot of questions. Do you have anything over there?
No, I want to while we have time, what I want to talk about is, people are watching this right now. Maybe parents, maybe even kids are watching or listening, and they're like, oh my gosh, I want a part of this. There are camps all across the country. And I'll say we are opening up more camps because thanks to my beautiful wife, we're opening up a camp here in Texas, hopefully in a year. So Sara, how can we dive into experience camps? If we have lost somebody, we want to take care of our kids, what can we do?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, you're here, you're listening, you're going to go ask your grieving friends some questions about their people. So just showing up as a grief-aware, grief-informed individual in the world is a great place to start. For Experience Camps itself, certainly our website, experiencecamps.org. Our social media does a really good job, too, of sharing the stories of kids through their own voices. We have a lot of videos of kids talking about their grief and sharing what they want people to know about grief. And then we have a whole other channel called griefsucks.com, which is just for teens, just for kids who want to share their stories with other teens like them and connect with that individual experience at that phase of development is such a unique thing. So it's, going to the website, finding out how to apply to camp. We have year-round programs as well, and mostly just being a grief-informed individual so that you can carry this mission forward into the world beyond camp.
Well, Sara, I wish we had more time with you because we could talk about this for hours and hours. But Experience Camps celebrated 15 years last year since it was founded by you. So congratulations.
Yes,
thank you.
Very much so.
And again, like Kris said, there are multiple locations across the country. Experience Camps is going to open even more. They have the signature week-long camp for kids along with adults-only retreats, family camps. Sara, thank you so much for being with us, my friend.
Thank you.
And let me just brag for a second. It is so impressive, obviously, what Sara's done, but what you have done. You were a counselor. You still are a counselor. Now you're on the board. The two of you and this entire group at Experience Camps have changed so many lives. And I have watched it firsthand when I see these kids and I see the difference it makes. Like, kudos to you.
Thanks, babe. I mean, I give them credit. I think what's incredible, look, I don't want any of these kids to experience grief. Without help, their lives can go down a dark path. With the right intervention, which Experience Camps creates, they become the most empathetic, mature, incredible kids. And that's the silver lining about grief. So thank you, everybody. If you've lost someone, we are sending our love to you. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Hey, Dr. Phil here. My network, Merit TV, has it all.
Now, let me blow your mind.
Merit TV's got the news that matters.
The selection of a new pope.
Entertainment you crave.
Busted.
Everybody in a good mood today?
And live events.
Surprise.
What am I, chopped liver?
With serious punch.
Big shot.
Go to merittv.com and download the Merit TV app today.